Welcome back to Block 10 of the Summer Squares series. In this lesson, we're going to explore painting with fibers in a very fun and easy art form called needle felting. All you need is a single felting needle, some foam or styrofoam, or my favorite is Pink Panther insulation foam that you can get at Home Depot, of like a big 2-foot square. I think they're like $7 or something, but I need to find that. So I'm going to use this little piece of foam for now until I can find it. And then just some wool felt and wool roving. And all roving is it's unspun wool. You can get this at the big box stores. Many knit shops carry it. Even some quilting shops carry it these days. But wool yarns work too, as long as they're not spun so tight you can pull them apart and actually make roving. The needle felting needles are really sharp. There's little barbs on the end of the points and on the sides of the point, so you don't want to touch that. So just take care not to touch the needle below the little handle there. I thought a hummingbird would be perfect and a fun way to play with colors. So I found this photo from this website for nature lovers called Uniguide, and I'm just going to play with this photo. I inserted that into my Procreate app and I traced the outline. Then I sectioned them off, as I thought it might be fun to do a stained glass look maybe. But this is optional, of course. As long as you have the outline, you can fill it in or draw your own shape, honestly. A flower works really great here. But once you have your image, I cut him out. So whatever image you use, just make sure it fits in a 6-inch finished design. I've got this on my website if you want to try the hummingbird. Just make sure whatever it is that you use just fits well on a 6-inch finished background. Cut out your image and place it on the chosen wool blend background that you're using. I have this royal blue felt blend. I know it's not 100% wool because I can kind of feel that, if it's acrylic or I'm not sure what it is in there, but it'll still work well. And I started with a 7-inch square, as this will shrink a bit as we work. So when I place the image, I just made sure to leave a 1/2 inch space from the edge. So I've gathered some roving that I had and some wool yarn. And even if you only have wool yarns that you want to pull apart, they're really great. They're great to use for outline. You can just work in pulling them apart. Just like I said, just make sure that it doesn't have a big twist to them, because they're not going to pull apart well. You want to, like Noro Kyrian, if you're familiar with that, or you can tell if you look at the yarn, it's not twisted at all. It's all just sort of like you could easily just pull it apart. That's what you're looking for. So I started by outlining my shape onto the square, just using a Sharpie, a fine Sharpie. You could use a chalk pencil here too. This will all be covered, so it really doesn't matter what you use. And once your shape is outlined, you can just eye up your photo and work the detail lines. If you're going for a stained glass look, or if you've got detail lines in your photo, just outline them. That way you know where to put your colors. It's just a little easier. And if you don't like it at the end, you can always cover those lines with the felting, because we're going to be putting layer on top of layer for this. What I did was I just took a very thin black wool yarn and I slowly started to punch it in with a single needle. Use short, quick stabs and try not to bend the needle as you work. Just work straight up and down, because these needles will break pretty easily if you come in. You can come in at an angle, which is a great way to work this if you're wanting texture, but just make sure you don't come in at an angle and then pull it straight up. You really just want to use quick up and down motions, whether it's straight up and down or it's on an angle. So if you're not doing black outlines, you can also use yarns that will match your intended colors of each of your shapes as well. Thicker, nubby yarns really look cool, especially in a bigger piece like I did in this Georgia O'Keeffe poppy. I used this homespun wool that was just awesome. But this is a tiny little bird, so I'm just staying with very thin yarn to outline it. When you come to the end of a line, just snip it, felt it in place, and then start at another point. This is a very fun and forgiving art form, as you can always rip out a section that you did. that you aren't happy with. You know, if you screw up on the line or you come off the line a little bit, just rip it back out and start again. But once you're satisfied with your outline, if you have a tool that holds more than one needle, like this one here holds 3. Clover also makes one that holds 6. But I do like to stamp it in just to reinforce that line, because sometimes it's hard to hit it with just that single needle. So I take the bigger tool and I just stamp it in. But yay, now it's time to add the color. This is the fun part. So I use a single needle for this just to stab the colors in place and establish the fill-in colors. Once I'm happy, I'll go over it with the multi-needle tool. But as you can see here, I'm ripping apart a wool yarn to make a roving in this turquoise color. I don't have roving in this turquoise with me, so I'm just going to use this yarn and fill in the shape. Just keep looking at your photo and adding colors as you'd like to interpret. And as you can see, I'm not following the image exactly. I'm just using it as a guide. You know, taking license with what you see and with what you actually do to your piece is what makes your piece artful and yours alone. So try not to go for like perfection here. Just use your photo as a guide and just have fun adding your colors. We will be adding shadows and highlights to this. So this first step, we're just filling it in with the base. So to stamp it in, to stamp the colors in, you want to use your needle as a guide to sort of spread the roving around and stab it along those outlines. But use a light hand here to scrape the colors to the line, as the needle could break easily if you apply too much pressure. To blend colors, take 2 yarns or 2 colors of roving, pull them apart and stack them several times like I'm doing here, just to get a nice blend. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll get that overall blend of color that you're looking for, which will add a lot of interest to your piece, as each section will already have some cool effects, light and dark effects, even before we add the details. This is a very relaxing art form, and you can just play and keep everything kind of light and breezy, you know. Once you're happy, you can commit and stamp it all in with your bigger tool, or just use the single needle felting tool, of course. But remember though, you can pull out anything that you're unhappy with, so just enjoy. You know, it's just a tiny little bit of materials. It's not expensive. It is impossible to mess up needle felting, because you could just pull it out if you don't like it and then just pop in a different color, or maybe use that. When you pull it out, it'll come out in a little clump. That actually can be used. You know, you can use these little wool felt clumps in details later. So, and we're going to be adding a flower that this hummingbird is flying to. So sometimes those can be great in texture and flowers. So, you know, and even if as you're working you cover up some of your outlines, that's okay. If you like the outlines, we can reinforce them when the coloring is all done. We'll just go over the black again and just outline them again. You can eliminate the lines altogether if that is where this journey takes you. So just have fun and play with it. Like I said, it's really difficult to mess this up. It's pretty easy stuff. And it's just fun. It's like coloring in those coloring books that I have a million of, because I love them. So I'm just going to continue to punch in these base colors, and then I'll come back and work the details with you. Okay, so this is just a rough fill-in just to get his shape and his coloring. One thing I notice, just so you can see how easy it is to pull this out, he's a little bit too thick here if you look at the picture, so I'm gonna make that a little bit skinnier here, and his body really ends right there. So this line here makes him look like he's a little bit longer than he is. So it's really a simple fix. I'm just gonna take my needle and just slowly push this in. I finally got my hands on, this is that Pink Panther insulation board that I love. I like it because when you use the foam pad, a lot of the times there'll become a divot in here, and then a lot of that foam gets locked up in the back of your work. So it's great when they're new, but they wear out really quickly. So I really, really love this. There's gonna be a million holes in there and you can just keep using it. So we're just gonna thin out his little neck here. Come away from that line, and I might take his wing and just go a little bit more here. So my outline blends in with the back really well because the background is really dark, but you could pick that line up if that's happening to you. Like if this was a lighter background, I would probably pick that up. And then I might add some blue right here, but I can do that when I do the shading and things. All right, so I like the shape of him a little bit better here. And then here, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pick this line up, so I'll outline, take that out, and you can see he's kind of getting pretty dark where his tail starts, so I am going to stamp this in here, and then I'll fill this in with more pink. So his tail just looks a little bit longer, and his body ends where a normal hummingbird body would end. I'm so sorry that the camera's shaky. It's the nature of this needle felting here. And I'll play with that as we go. But you see how I'm just taking my needle and just scraping the very tops of the fibers to punch that in. So just starting on his wing here, let's just talk about that for a minute. I put a really light line, as you can see from the photo. There's a bright little edge where the sun might be hitting it. This line's a little bit thicker than that line, but that's okay. So I'm gonna keep this line pretty straight, and I'm just gonna stamp this in. And then if you look at the photo, there's some dark shadows here. So what I want to do is probably take some orange and then just take a little bit of brown just to give that some shadow. And you can see the ratio. I have mostly orange and a little bit of dark brown. So I'm going to just do my little blending technique here. It's just pulling the fibers apart and stacking them. When you're needle felting, it's best to go with a very light amount of fiber. Stamp that in and then just keep adding to it. If you get too thick right away, it's just very hard to get the color that you want. It's just going to look like a big blob, so don't try to rush it and put in a bunch of color. I'll go a little bit brighter here. And you see when I put this down, I oriented it so that the dark was on the bottom here. My line's disappearing a little bit, but that's okay because I can take black when I'm done, that thin black again, and just put it right up on top. These lines are really just guides for color. And when you scrape the fibers along that line, you can get a pretty nice solid edge there. pretty dark along this bottom edge, so I'm going to just take the brown and just very translucently put it over the orange so you can still see that orange underneath, but the brown is laying on top as just to serve as a shadow. The fun thing too with needle felting is really great to stitch into, so you can always embroider lines with corresponding colors too, just to detail them. And then it gets really bright through here. So I would take some orange and maybe even some yellow. But you can see I'm using just the tiniest little bit of fiber here. And every little layer you do makes a big difference. Let's get some more yellow. I'm going to go ahead and just cover that black line that's going across. And then I will add that in later. So you see, I just start with this like blob of color here. You can even do this little twisting motion. Just the tiniest little bit of orange, so it looks like a yellow orange. And then right through here, it's pretty dark where his wing is turning under. So in this case, I'm going to stay almost all brown and just the tiniest little bit of orange. And then just put that in the crook of his wing, but leave that top light. So it looks like his wing is folding under like it is. Dark right next to his body. And then as you can see, I'm pushing the dark real close to that light edge there. And take the tool. So sorry about this camera shake. So I like the darkness under here, but it is brighter coming through here. Like you can see that big strip of orange here. This is the beauty of adding little light layers too, because if the color isn't just quite what you're thinking, you don't have to rip out, you can just add to it. Let's get some more yellow. Even that, which seems like a very little bit, is a lot. So I'm gonna take that out. And remember, this is a small little piece we're working on here. And just referring to your photo, we want to keep our dark there. Keep our dark here. And just add this little bright touch where that sun is hitting his wing. Now there's a very dark brown shadow that goes across here, so I'll show you a little trick for that. I think I like the way that looks. So I'll take my multi-tool here. But there's that little dark line right underneath that, the wing, top of the wing. So what you could do is if you had brown yarn, you could use that. Or you can take this little piece of roving and sort of twist it so it resembles yarn. A lot of times what I'll do too is I'll put my needle in, fold it, stamp that in, and just stamp that along the top there. What's It's really hard to hit these little tiny pieces with one, so a lot of times I'll just take this tool and just stamp it in. Okay, a little bit more. I like where the shading is, but I think I'm going to put a little bit of orange in so it doesn't quite look so yellow. And then, like I said, if you want to work the detail of his wing, you can do that in felting for sure. It takes a little bit, but you can also do it in embroidery. And then once you get your work in, what you want to do is just lift it up off the piece a little bit. Okay, and I think I will leave that because when I do go to outline him again, I'll have that nice highlighted top of his wing there. Okay, so there's an example of just adding highlights and shadows to your piece. He's really dark going from his body, which I changed, remember, and I ended right there, down to his tail. So that same brown, I'm going to go ahead and add that shadow underneath, and we can always add the pink, more pink here, more green up here. He's got a lot of shadow right there. Got some green in there too, which is okay because some of that green is reflected in that shadow. A lot of times I'll take my needle and just sort of stab in between just to bring some of the color up into the next color, blend it a little bit. And then you can see up this side, it's pretty dark, so I'm going to add some darkness there. Not a lot, just a thin layer of shadow. And shadows aren't always black, although this looks pretty dark. It's really a dark, dark emerald. So I'm just using brown for now. And then I may go on top of that with some of this blue. You can just sort of bring it in and blend it. And again, I'm just kind of forgetting about my stained glass lines for now. And I can go back in later and add them again. So this little shadow goes all the way up to his beak. So a lot of times what you can do if you have kind of a bigger piece is just twist that out of the way. It's a lot easier to add another layer than it is to take some away. So we're just adding that little shadow to his underside. And it gets the shadow gets a little bit thinner out here, so I'm going to take some of this blue, punch it into the shadow. And then once I like that, I just stamp it in, because I know I can blend it with a lighter on top of that guy. Got some shadow right in here too, so it's gonna great to bring that black line in so you can really see the curve of his head. So the other wing here looks pretty yellow, which I think is so pretty. So I'm gonna do mostly yellow here with just a highlight of orange. And you can see I'm just gonna go right over those marks again, and I will put those lines in later. Stamp that in a little bit, and then you use your fine tool, your one needle, to establish his line. And then same on the other wing, he's still got that brown shadow here. And it gets a little darker under here, so rather than do brown, I might just do some orange under there. because his wings are really the same color, but in the sun, they look different. So at the points, I put my needle in, I bend the wool over, and that gives you a nice line there. And you can see I'm taking this roving and blending the orange up into the yellow in places. And although the wings are straight across here, they're a little wavy down here, so we can add that in. And this is what I was talking about using the angle of the needle. If you stab it over and over again, it will create texture. So even without embroidery, you can get these really great texture lines here. So over and over and over again, it sinks the wool down into the background while leaving what you don't stamp up and puffy. So you can get those lines. So down here, same thing, we'll angle it this way. And I am at an angle, but of course I'm coming in and back out at an angle, not angle up. So just be careful of that. Dragging some of the black in. A couple more lines in. If you work long enough, you can get some insanely beautiful detail without any other material except for the roving and the wool that you're using. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go over those black lines. And you know, I may not even add them back in. You know, this is, once again, just a creative process. I had an idea and I may use it, I may not. I may come back in with those stained glass lines, and I may just leave him as a blended little bird. I am not sure, but I know I'm going to outline him again. Whether it's in black or whether it's in the color, I haven't decided yet. But that's just part of this process, is just letting it be what it wants to be, rather than, sometimes it's just better than to force something that doesn't want to be. We'll see what it looks like at the end here. So now I've added this more blue, so in order to blend this, you know, you don't want this solid shadow line a lot of the times. You want to just blend it in. So if I blend some of the dark into the blue, blend the blue into the dark, just looks a little bit more realistic. And then the top of his head is just a little bit more emerald green than in the original yellow, which is fine. The yellow that I put in there, it does show a little bit of a lighter. There's definitely a yellow tone to it, but now that I'm looking at it, I see a little bit more green, emerald green. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull some emerald out of this old Noro yarn and see just the tiniest bit, tiny, tiny, tiny. And we'll spread that out just a little bit more. And sometimes in this roving and in this yarn, you'll end up still having the yarn shape, which could work to our advantage if we wanted that as our outline, which we might. So I'm going to blend that green back down into that blue. And just keep playing with it until it just, the image of what you're going for will appear. Just keep playing, keep adding colors. I like that a lot better. Stay within your original outline, because that is the ultimate shape of the guy, of this little bird, or whatever it is that you're working. And then within that shape, you can really just do whatever you want to. Some more color up to his beak there. Okay, so I'm going to play with this. I know this camera is shaky because it's got to sit right on the surface that I'm working on. And I'll work on his tail, and I'll just take pictures as I go and just talk through the decisions that I made until he's done, and then we'll work on just maybe like a little flower, one of their favorite flowers that they like to fly to. Okay, so I started on his tail. I stamped in a little bit of light pink on the bottom just so that it looks like the sun is hitting him. And as you can see from the photo, that there's a little bit of light there on that left side. And then I added some dark just above his tail. And then I stamped his tail in really solidly so that it kind of looked like it was fading into the background. Then on his wing, I just worked a little bit harder in the crook of his wing, put a little bit more dark in there. And then I took some of the yellow and I blended a little bit of green into it just so it looked like some of his body color was on the top of his wing. And then stamped in some more of those lines there at the bottom. For his left wing, same thing, I added more yellow and brought up the color from the bottom and stamped it in so that it looked like he had just little feathers. And same thing on the top, just another line of light. And this is the body that I worked on getting some more blue and some more green in there. I rounded his head a little bit. I put a little bit of light on his beak and then gave him an eye. And then I outlined him with a very thin wool yarn. So then my decision is, do I put my stained glass lines back in? And this is what it looks like. I just sort of laid them out. And I really like it, but if I feel like I would want to do the whole block stained glass. So I took a couple pictures of him with the lines and without the lines, and then again looked at it with the lines, and then finally decided on without the lines. But in my journal, I'll remember the stained glass look that I had an idea for, and maybe that will inspire a quilt later on. You never know. But I really like them just as is and outlined. So I wanted to put some background flower and just an attractant for him along the side, so he's just not floating out there in the middle of nowhere. You know, they're always found near flowers. So I just grabbed some green yarn, some maroon crewel thread, and some red roving, and some potential other novelty yarns that I might use. And the first thing I did was I just laid out this tweed yarn here like this, and then I stamped it in. No roving or anything, just stamped in that yarn. And then I took little bits of green roving, lots of different little colors, and rolled little balls and just stamped them in as leaves and buds. I didn't go with a lot of detail here because I really want the hummingbird to just stand out, and I wanted this to kind of meld into the background. So what I was really just going for was for shape and color and not a lot of detail. Inside the buds, I took little snippets of crewel wool embroidery thread and put them inside the bud and just stamped those in. And then just took red roving and stamped those inside the buds. And then I wanted to play with some novelty yarn to see if I liked that. You know, I could stitch that in. I could needle felt it in, but you can't really needle felt in synthetic yarn. So what I would have to do is get some red or some green and needle felt that in on top of this yarn to make it stay, or I could just stitch it in. But you know, it's becoming too detailed, and I just really like it the way that it's kind of set back and blurry, where your eye just goes straight to the hummingbird. So plus I wanted to stay all wool and all needle felting, no beads or yarns or anything else. So this is what I've decided to do, and he is finished. I think he's going to live in my journal, and I'm going to enjoy looking back at him, and I think he'll inspire maybe some needle felting quilts. And then I wanted to share a couple photos. This is Debbie's journal covers. They're just beautiful. Look at the fabric she used in the background, and the leaves and vines, and that trim that she used for the vines. So genius. These are beautiful. And then this page that she did, this log cabin with the bunnies, is the cutest thing I've ever seen. I love the embroidery she did around the frame, and the shading is really great. How she's got the dark blue on the upper right and the light fabrics down on the left. And these bunnies look like they're just playing in a little field. And then I got a photo from Sarah, and she decided to do her Irish lace in yellow, which is so cheerful and beautiful. The yo-yo centers, she said, were from a broken bracelet, so that's such a great way to use up some found objects and broken jewelry, and this is just a beautiful job. So thank you guys so much for sharing your work as always. Next week, I think I want to go back to fabric and maybe play with some texture, maybe some 3-dimensional fabrics. I'm not really sure what that means yet, but I'm going to play around this weekend and maybe come up with something for our journals or quilts. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.